If you run a restaurant, where you make money and what people are paying for are often two separate things. There are always these really peculiar bits of reverse psychology in catering and hospitality. Menu design and choice architecture is really, really interesting. You can add a single word to the menu and you can charge more for things.
Rory Sutherland is back in this exclusive podcast recorded at our Hungry Supper Club back in April with an audience of the UK's hottest hospitality founders. Strap into this deep dive with the godfather of behavioural science.
Everything's kind of context dependent. You can spend ages going, we can't possibly do that. If you change the psychological frame, actually you can. There's an amazing amount of money you can make just by explaining yourself very clearly. Because I find the restaurant hospitality industry a bit like the Galapagos Islands. in that because it's so fast moving, so inventive, and it's a fast feedback business, you can learn more about marketing in 1 year in that industry than you would in 10 years in somewhere else. I find it absolutely extraordinary. It's just utterly fascinating as a business.
What are some of those weird, underrated lessons?
Well, first of all, I suppose if you run a restaurant, you are aware of the fact, which most businesses aren't, that where you make money and what people are paying for are often two separate things. Okay, you can't put on the bill atmosphere or vibe. Okay. But people are paying for that every bit as much as they're paying for the food. Obviously, in a restaurant, if you think about it, you typically attract people with the food and make money on the wine, historically. So it's a brilliant entry. This is why I always say that young people working in the hospitality industry is like a free MBA. Because it's a brilliant entry in microcosm to a really brilliant, complex business where you understand absolutely everything, from the most practical things like logistics to obviously deeply emotional things. And of course, when you delve into it, there's a huge amount of psychological value being created. I mean, I've got a very mischievous thing, which is going to scandalize 5 people in the room, which is that actually miso soup isn't really very nice, is it? Okay, objectively, okay, if miso soup didn't exist and your daughter invented it, said, Dad, I've just invented a new soup and there's a leaf and a white cube in it for no readily apparent reason, you'd have a sip and you go, look, don't give up the day job. And yet, because it's Japanese and because of all the associations, by the way, I drink a lot of it myself, okay? I'm not saying I don't like it, but I'm saying that if I were, objectively, you can't say it's a great soup. It's a great soup because of all the associations and the other things attached to it. Sushi, I'd say the same, okay?
If you were to open a restaurant in London, I know we've talked about bacon sandwich before.
Bacon sandwich, yeah.
But say it wasn't bacon sandwich, say it was something else. Open a restaurant tomorrow in London, it's Rory Sutherland's restaurant. What do you open first? And second, what are the most underrated marketing levers you pull to get people through the door?
Purely, now, am I doing it for pleasure or for money? Because they're two very different answers, I think, aren't they? Probably.
Let's go with money, yeah.
Okay, with money, and we're partly looking at this with flat white or fuck off, I'd look, given that the big problem in London is real estate costs, I'd look for a real estate play. In other words, is there a restaurant concept which would work in real estate in a setting where nothing else would work? And I'll give you an example of this. The guy who founded, I think it's called Caviar House, which you find at every airport, selling kind of, effectively high-end seafood. I didn't realize, I always ask the question, I'm just about to get on a pressurized metal tube for 12 hours. I really don't want to risk eating something that'll give me the shits. So I was always a bit baffled by how many caviar houses there were. It's actually ingenious because it's only seafood. All you need is an electricity supply. You don't need any ventilation. So you can occupy airport space which nobody else can occupy. And so the guy made a fortune basically spotting the fact that there's a particular food concept which doesn't require fans, heating, ventilation, or any of the other stuff. So basically all you need is a big fridge and a power supply and 240 volts, and he's off to the and a few stools, and you're off to the races. So one of the things I always encourage people to do is think like a game theorist. My argument is...
What do you mean? What's a game theorist?
Don't look at what's perfect. Look at what's underrated, in a funny kind of way. And somebody came up to me at Google, of all places, and said, "It's thanks to you we bought our house." Oh, weird. And my advice was, if you're buying a house, find something that other people hate that you don't mind at all. So most people don't like buying a house next to a pub, okay? To me, it's a bonus, right? So I'm actually winning there by exploiting my own eccentricity. And I nearly bought a house in Deal, which was on the seafront, and was half the price it should have been because it was next to a massive beer garden. And I was going to buy it, and I was just going to go to the landlord and go, right, here's the deal, okay? I'm never going to complain about anything you do ever, okay? On 2 conditions: you deliver beer on request and no techno. Those were going to be my two sort of red lines, okay? But no, so actually one great way to open a restaurant is to look for, I would say the opposite of a good idea is another good idea. And the point of Bacon Sandwich is noticing this thing, that there's a weird trade-off in restaurants between having a large menu and having a tiny menu, in that if you have a tiny menu and you only do one thing, people not unreasonably assume you must be pretty good at that one thing. So actually having a massive... The whole idea was, by the way, bacon sandwich. We only sell bacon sandwiches. We have a deliberate perversity, which is you can't have ketchup. You can only have brown sauce, which is deliberately designed to polarize the audience. And there are only 2 drinks you can have, which is champagne or Builder's tea. And that's all we do. And the point is, to be honest, it's a thought experiment. I don't, for goodness sake, don't necessarily take this literally. But the point is, there are always these really peculiar bits of reverse psychology in catering and hospitality, which always fascinate me. Anybody here from Chicago? No, interesting. If you come from Chicago, you cannot put ketchup on a hot dog. It's just the rules. And it was all because this guy outside the White Sox Stadium sold hot dogs, and he put a big sign up saying no ketchup. He believed that ketchup just disguised poor quality meat. And the thing became a complete Chicago tradition, which is even people who've only lived in Chicago for 5 years regarded as like a heinous crime. And so those really peculiar little eccentricities, building those into the menu always strikes me as things you refuse to do are kind of proof of sincerity in a way.
And how could these guys do that? What are things you could not do?
One thing I love is Will... Sorry. In Will Gadara's book, I'm a huge fan of the book. I think it's a wonderful book. And we're going to try and bring him over to the UK, I think.
Yes, we are.
Is that idea of going to the best restaurant in the world. Everybody then makes a list of all the good things they want to copy. And Will says, we're not going to copy any of those. We can't afford to. In any case, they're doing it already. And Will asks the secondary question, which is, what about the meal wasn't very good? Turned out, it's the best restaurant in the world, so nothing's going to be atrocious, okay? Or according to San Pellegrino, anyway. And the verdict was the coffee was just average, and the beer drinkers in the party were given really short shrift compared to the wine drinkers. So Will goes back to his own restaurant, in 2011 this was, and he only does 2 things. He appoints one guy, the coffee sommelier, and says, your job is to make this coffee experience amazing. And the other guy, who I think was from the kitchens, becomes the beer sommelier. So suddenly, not many people at a Michelin 3-star restaurant probably ask for beer, but when they do, they're expecting, well, we got Sam Adams on draft. And instead, a guy comes out and gives them a list of craft IPAs with tasting notes and food pairing suggestions. Now, if you're one of those people, as far as you're concerned, that's the best restaurant in the world, because it's never happened to you before. And so that business of optimize for surprise... who is it? The gentleman here from Flatiron, is that right? One of the founders? No?
No, mate.
The ice cream thing. who was it? It's one of Osh's friends, isn't it? Charlie Carroll, thank you. Okay. The ice cream thing, where they give you a little token at the end and you go out onto the street with a little miniature ice cream cone. Those kind of things, they often seem a little bit gratuitous, even a little bit hokey. But the thing about the human brain is you notice what you weren't expecting much more acutely than things you were.
That's the peak end rule as well.
And that's also a really interesting question. So I've actually looked at that reverse benchmarking, as I call it, that Will Gadara did, and I realized that actually half of the world's most successful businesses, either intentionally or accidentally, did the same thing. So Apple, if you like, or Steve Jobs, who wasn't Steve Jobs couldn't even code, right? He wasn't a technologist at all. Everybody in Silicon Valley was going, what can a computer do? And Steve Jobs asked the 90-degree opposite question, which is, how does it feel like while you're doing it? So take a variable or a component that everybody else has overlooked or underplayed, and then double down on it. Is a really interesting strategy. Find a weakness, find something that everybody else has missed, and double down on it. Now, we were talking about this the other day, and we said, in car rental, once you're driving around in the car, it's all the same shit, right? The thing that differentiates car rental is the journey from the arrivals hall to actually picking up your car, and then the first 5 minutes of actually working out how the fuck the car works. All right? You know, in other words, how do I open the fuel filler cap, or how do I let the handbrake off? And we said, you know, if you started a disruptive car rental company, you charge for it. It's £50. We meet you at arrivals. We hand you the keys. We walk you to the car. We push your luggage trolley, and we give you a laminated A4 sheet with any idiosyncrasies of the car. Now, if you did that, you'd be the best car rental company anybody had ever come across in their life, okay? Because you're looking at the bit that everybody else has neglected. And by the way, when you think about it, okay, what's a bit weird about car rental is if you book a £70 taxi to pick you up from Gatwick, they meet you at arrivals and they push your trolley to the car. But when you spend 300 quid on car rental, even though you've typed in all your details 3 weeks before, including your driving license number, you have to stand in a queue while someone types War and Peace into a sort of antiquated computer. And then eventually they hand you some keys and say it's Bay 307, the other side of the coach park. And so what I'm saying is that actually Uber, by the way, since they're our hosts this evening, my argument is that the Uber app is, intentionally or not, just a piece of psychological genius. Because it doesn't change the quantity of waiting time for a taxi, but by showing you your little car on a map, it changes the quality of waiting. Humans, just very, very simple instinct, humans hate uncertainty. And previously, you booked a cab and you spent 15 minutes in a kind of limbo going, is that it? No, I wonder, have they forgotten me? Maybe they can't find the house. Maybe they've already been and they've left. Okay. Whereas suddenly what Uber did, it also changed the experience of payment, by the way, at the end. You're talking about the peak end rule.
Yeah.
What Uber did, they didn't change the bit in the middle at all. That's just riding around in the back of a car, right? That's not significantly different from any other taxi experience. But the beginning bit and the end bit, where you just get out of the car and walk away, or the beginning bit where you go, oh, look, he's stuck at those traffic lights, I'll have another pint, okay? Rather than standing outside in the rain, wondering whether this is your car or a serial killer who's escaped from jail, okay? Whereas Uber tells you your license plate number. What that is psychological transformation. You know, it doesn't really change the objective reality like the time. It just changes the emotional experience, the emotions you feel while waiting. And I think the reason I think your business is so fantastic is it understands that, because if you don't understand that, you go out of business to a large extent. There's a great Chinese proverb which says, if you find it difficult to smile, do not open a shop. Okay. And in the same way, in all service industries, it's as much about the social transaction in many ways as it is about the financial transaction. And the great thing about the restaurant business, because it's a fast feedback business, is if you get it wrong, you go out of business. And whereas by contrast, I think a lot of conventional businesses are obsessed with metrics. You know, they're just measuring what's easy to measure, like time or cost or distance. And those things don't translate at all into actual customer enjoyment.
What would you say, what's your thoughts on value for money as a strategy?
Be really careful. I mean, obviously, I don't want to come across as some arsehole who goes, price isn't really important. But generally, I always argue that dropping the price is the last thing you should try.
Right.
And sometimes it's the right thing to do. There are lots and lots of reasons not to do it, if you possibly can, one of which is it's very difficult to get back once you've done it. It's a kind of irreversible decision. But I always think that value on is generally a better use of your time and effort than money off. In some senses, dropping your price is the most expensive way of appealing to a customer, because it's effectively bribing someone to buy from you with real money, rather than seducing, effectively reframing value. So the psychology of price is really weird, because to economists, price is a number, but to customers, consumers, price is a feeling. And by the way, things can feel expensive or feel cheap, and it's got nothing to do with the headline price. It's what you're comparing it to. I mean, I always thought, by the way, Indian food was massively underpriced in the UK, because people who'd happily spend £120 on a French meal would get really pissy if they went out for an Indian meal and had to pay £40, even though it's obviously better food. Okay, slightly controversial. So what you'd actually find in that category is you just get these anchor points. And people don't really have an answer to the question, is it expensive? They always go, compared to what? And so this business of the price frame and price psychology, I mean, we all know this, okay? How many people use Klarna here? Come on, admit it. no one's admitting it. Thank you. There's one honest person in the room. The joke I was making about Klarna is that to an economist, it's like an interest-free 3 payments to purchase this thing. Now, actually, 3 payments of £100 feels completely different from 1 payment of £300. Just does. It's because whatever it does, it triggers different neurons or whatever it may be. And I know this because I've been studying behavioral science for about 25 years, and I was buying one of those Dyson air purifiers, and I get to the final bit where you have to pay, and it goes 450 quid. I'm not fucking paying that. Fucking James is taking the piss. And then it says, or you can have 3 payments of £150. I go, oh yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. And I went and bought it, okay? Now, I've studied all these biases and things myself for ages, but it still worked on me. And so, you know, by the way, menu design, as the gentleman from Hoppers said, you're absolutely right to devote that much attention to menu design and also to experiment with it a lot. Because the way in which you present prices, in some restaurants, you obviously know this trick, you have a disproportionately expensive item because it makes the other, some people buy it, but it also makes the other items seem good value by comparison, for instance. You know, that's one of the tricks in menu design. There are other ones like you spell out the price, you don't actually put it in numbers, you don't put a pound sign, you just put the words. Okay, if you've been to the United States, you see all of these things that they've studied, all deployed in the same way. And so menu design and choice architecture is really, really interesting because if you get it right and you make a meal easy to choose, fundamentally people now feel they've made a confident choice. Effectively, if you want to sum up human behavior in a very simple sentence, people act to minimize fear of regret. And so if you make a choice very easy and you make people very confident about their choice, generally they're now pretty happy. If you spent the whole meal wishing you'd eaten something else, totally different. And so the way in which you actually design a menu, and by the way, it's very strange because, I mean, I've spent ages talking to KFC saying that the problem they have is that the choice architecture of their menu is a mess. You see what I mean? There isn't a kind of... Now, McDonald's is fairly structured. You probably have a burger, you have some fries, you have a drink, you might have a side or some extra item. Unless you're a man and ordering on a screen, in which case you actually order 2 burgers because it's not embarrassing when you're not doing it face to face. This is one of the things McDonald's has actually found. If you order on a screen, there are certain behaviors which people are happy to do as long as they're doing it anonymously. Does anybody want a really lovely story about Uber Eats, actually?
Crack on.
I had a friend who worked in banking who had a boss who was actually Hong Kong Chinese. And his one huge indulgence was on Friday, he ordered a delivery of an absolute blowout Chinese meal. And the guy would arrive carrying 3 bags of food. And he'd open the door and shout up the stairs, "Guys, the food's arrived," even though he lived on his own. Okay, all right. What was even weirder is he admitted this to his colleagues. Okay. But I mean, what's so fascinating about this is, you know, there is a huge amount of psychology. I got really interested in this very early on, about 8 years ago, working with Diageo, when I argued that all restaurants deploy massive choice architecture biases to encourage people to order wine, not spirits. I don't know if anybody's heard me talk about this, but if you think about it, you arrive in a restaurant and there are already wine glasses on the table. In fact, if you say we're not having any wine, they take them away with a bit of a huff. And you know, and you've got a big arrow over your table in neon going, "These are the stingy people," okay? It's exactly the same as choice architecture. Still or sparkling is a really, really profitable phrase because it makes it difficult to say tap. If you say, "Would you like water?" it's quite easy to say just a jug of tap water. Okay? But if you say still or sparkling, you've actually got to slightly transgress in order to say neither of the above, I'll just have a jug of tap water. And of course, the jug of tap water is deliberately designed to be very visible as a mild act of humiliation, that these are the people who are too tight to buy bottled water. And then there are loads and loads of wine glasses around the table, which basically say, we're expecting you to drink wine. And then they hand out a wine list, which is not called a drinks list, it's called the wine list. And it has 6 pages of wine, okay? And then there's a back crappy laminated page full of the drinks that have actually been produced by skillful distillation, okay? Rather than just having people trample on some grapes. Being a bit mischievous here. Then finally, of course, it's even cleverer still because they hand the wine list to one person on the table. Now, if you think about it, there's only one drink, apart from a jug of Pimm's, I guess, the only other exception. There's only one drink that one person can order for a whole group. You can't order beers for all the group or cider for all the group. You can't say everybody here is going to have a martini. The only drink that one person can order for the group is either red or white wine. So effectively, by handing a wine list to one person, you've basically forced the table to drink wine, whether they want it or not. And so one of the things that's so fascinating is the extent to which humans respond to contextual cues of which they're not even consciously aware.
What are other biases these guys can implement in their restaurants that you think is interesting?
The peak end rule is always interesting.
Yeah, and just detail what that is, please.
The peak end rule would be we disproportionately tend to remember an experience by how well it starts, how well it ends, and the most extreme thing in the middle. Other things are be really, really clear about what you are. Now, we had a really interesting question about this because they came to us. Is anybody from Oaxaca here? Nobody?
No.
So our brief was that the problem with Mexican food is that nobody can remember the difference between a chimichanga and a burrito and a quesadilla and a so-and-so, so-and-so. And I thought that was just because we're ignorant gringos, but it turned out I got a friend who speaks fluent Spanish, and he said, I can never remember it either. Okay. And so we were having this long debate about, effectively how on earth we could clarify the distinction between these various different things. There's a fajita as well, isn't there? And something else. Burrito, fajita, quesadilla. Anyway. And then we suddenly went, hold on. How many people, we're all sort of reasonably sophisticated foodie Londoners. How many random people even know that Oaxaca is a Mexican restaurant? I mean, there isn't even a W in Spanish, okay? They spell it like that because it's phonetic. It's actually spelled with an X in Mexican Spanish. Am I right? Phew, thank you. Okay. And so we suddenly realized that, anybody know a guy called Mark McCulloch? A few of you must you?
Yeah, Scottish.
Scottish guy, yeah. Absolutely wonderful guy, I think. And I was on a phone call with him, and I think the guy's a genius. By the way, get him in. One of the things he says is that one of the things that restaurants get wrong is they assume that passers-by and customers know much more about what they do than they really do. And his brilliant example was Chopped. You know the chain Chopped. He found a woman who had walked past Chopped every day on her lunch break for 7 years, okay, to get a salad. Now, Chopped sells salads. But it doesn't say on the outside of the restaurant, Chopped the salad place or anything explicit like that. She, by some mental association, just associated chops with chopsticks, thought she didn't like spicy food, so for 7 years walked past a salad restaurant to go to get a salad further away because nobody had been explicit. And one of the things Mark McCulloch does is he says, there's an amazing amount of money you can make just by explaining yourself very clearly.
What's the, is it the Bombay, the chai cafe one, the chai wala one? That's
I was on the call with him.
Yeah.
Chai wala. Anybody know that? And this is why I thought Mark McCulloch is, well, for many other reasons as well, I thought Mark McCulloch is a genius, which is, we were having this discussion about what you put on the outside of chai wala. And the client said, quite intelligently...
Oh yeah, chai wala is like an Indian cafe restaurant.
Indian, it sells chai, it also sells coffee, typically it's sort of tikka sandwiches wrapped in naan. But it's Indian street food and a chai cafe, very largely. And the client, very wisely, said, yeah, we're conscious of this, so we're going to put Indian street food cafe on the window. And Mark McCulloch, bear in mind, he didn't pause for a second, and I was like, we are not worthy. He said, no, don't put that, put Indian street food and cafe. Because if you add and, you'll appeal to people who want a cafe, and you'll appeal to people who want Indian street food, rather than demanding that people like both. And I was like, whoa, okay, that was, to spot that in 1 second, I thought was genuine genius. But I mean, that business, there's a restaurant in Westerham where I live in Kent. And I always say, I'll tell you 2 stories, actually. When I first moved there was a local handyman in the village. And he placed every month in the parish magazine, there was an ad the size of a large postage stamp. And it just said, call Ron. That was what his business was called. He was called Ron. And the name of the business was the call to action, call Ron, 01959561234. I do the small jobs the builders don't want. I went up to Ron and I said, you realise, Ron, that's basically a perfect ad, because it's how to get in touch with me, who I am, and what I do. And everybody immediately can see, I can think of 5 of those jobs. In other words, I want shelves put up, I want this repaired, I want my washing machine taken to the dump. I can't ask a builder to do this. Looks like it's Ron. And he said, well, it's funny you say that, because he said it's been working really, really well for 9 years. It never stopped working. And the restaurant, there's a restaurant called Brunch in Westerham, which I really admire, because they just have a sign outside. It's called Brunch. What kind of food do they do? Pretty self-evident, right? You know you're going to get an Eggs Benedict or whatever. It just says brunch where dogs are always welcome. And I always get, it's absolutely perfect because it answers the 2 questions anybody might ask of a restaurant. What sort of food can I get? And can I bring my dog? Okay. And so there occasionally, you can find that way in advertising of just expressing what something is about in such a neat, elegant and differentiated way, that you can literally have, just as you said, there are tiny little butterfly effects at Hoppers, which can make you a fortune. Sometimes, there's a single sentence or something of that kind, which just has an absolutely transformative effect. Sometimes it's adding a single word. You can add a single word to the menu and you can charge more for things. I mean, you can charge, they've done experiments. If you describe them as succulent carrots or Pembrokeshire carrots, you add an adjective, you can basically put the price up by 15%. And so knowing all these things, I think, is really fascinating. But this is what's so beautiful about this is the best environment in which to learn all about it. I mean, there are other really weird categories of marketing, like cruise ships and luxury watches, which are also really fascinating because they're like the Galapagos Islands, because they're so extreme in terms of the conditions that you learn a lot more studying them than you would studying slower, more boring businesses.
Final question, mate, then we'll open it up to the floor. But I think your favourite business book is Obvious Adams.
Yep. There's a copy in your goodie bags, I think.
Yes, there is.
Have I ruined that?
You have ruined that, yeah. Cheers,
okay,
mate. But it's a very short read. I think it's like 38 pages.
Yeah.
What are some of the lessons and principles when these guys hopefully read it that they can apply to restaurants? Because it's a very weird kind of short book.
One of the great things is that, one, notice things. Secondly, quite often, the reason for success or failure, what we tend to do is when we have a big problem, we post-rationalize big reasons. I think the most common one would be the economy or Munjaro, okay? You see what I mean? Everybody likes to go to these, what you might call category problems that make it sound, their problems seem big, insurmountable, and kind of serious, the kind of problem you can talk about on Newsnight. And in Obvious Adams, there's a story about a shop that isn't doing very well, and Obvious Adams just turns up, looks at it, and says, the door's in the wrong place. Nobody can see how to go in, okay? Now, that sounds really, really silly and trivial in a funny kind of way, but it turns out that years ago, about 12 years ago, Taco Bell opened their first restaurant in London, and they've got a space right next to Trafalgar Square. Anybody else a bit of a secret fan? Come on, admit it. Nobody? Yeah, thank you. There are a few honest people in the room. I'll tell you the funniest story. When I first went to the US, by the way, I couldn't understand how cheap it was. And I assumed that it was like tapas. So I went into a Taco Bell. I sort of had 3 other, because it was like bean burrito, 69 cents. Okay, and I'm going, well, obviously it's only 69 cents, that's 40p. So it's going to be like that size. And I went and ordered about 15 things, and this tray arrived with a pyramid of food on it. But it turned out that they effectively opened in London on Trafalgar Square, and the restaurant failed. And I said, look, mate, I said, there are enough expat Americans in London to keep a Taco Bell going. There's no way. But they deduced from that there is no London market for a Taco Bell. They basically said, we tried a Taco Bell in London, it didn't work, therefore the concept doesn't work. It turned out, actually, when I spoke to somebody, they said everybody believed that we can't do Taco Bell in London because we tried and it didn't work. It was exactly the same problem as Obvious Adams. There was a huge sign in Trafalgar Square, a neon sign saying Taco Bell, but the entrance was in an alley round the back of the building, and so nobody could find the way in. And by the way, I think that's really, really important because it's very, very easy when someone fails to say the reason for our failure or the reason we got problems must be something generalizable. You know, the environment, the so-and-so, the location. And one of the things that really fascinates me about your business is, in a way, if we're all being honest, no one completely knows anything. The only way you can find out is by trying it. Because in 2 cases in my hometown, there was a restaurant which had literally been a graveyard. The location had been a graveyard for restaurants for 20 years, ever since I moved to the town. And the local kebab guy buys it and decides to open up an upmarket Turkish restaurant. And I was sort of going, literally, please don't do this. You know, I mean, look at the site. It's an absolute graveyard. Place is absolutely humming. There was a bizarre coffee shop which only sells gluten-free food. On the outskirts of Sevenoaks, on a dangerous bend, on a largely sort of obscure road. And again, when the guy opened it, I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to be rude, but I said, you know, this is going to be a catastrophe. The place is absolutely humming. I mean, would everybody agree that when you look at the relative success of different outlets, for example, we all love to post-rationalise and say, of course, it's due to this, or the Edinburgh market isn't that, or so-and-so people in this area don't like this kind of food. But it's just as likely that the reason is something really, really stupid. I mean, really, really trivial. Because the thing about the human brain, it doesn't really have a sense of proportion. You know, if something pisses us off, right, we're unhappy. And one of the funniest things, by the way, I almost want to write a book about this, is that the other thing is you can't ask your customers because they don't know what makes them happy. And the thing that amuses me the most, and I genuinely wanted to make a compilation of all these, is people are unhappy for one reason, and then they effectively look for they post-rationalize or reverse engineer rational explanations for why they don't like the restaurant, which is probably nothing to do with the real reason. And the one I absolutely love is go through TripAdvisor, look for 1-star reviews, and go and see how many of them start with this sentence. We had booked a table for my mother-in-law's birthday. Okay, right? And then there's a long litany of complaints about what the restaurant did wrong. And it suddenly occurred to me, okay, there's some guy there, right? He basically would rather be sitting in his pants watching Champions League, but it's his bloody mother-in-law's birthday. So he's got to go out to a restaurant, which is a much fancier restaurant than the one he would have chosen. And worse still, because it's her bloody birthday, he's going to have to pay, right? So this is a recipe for an awful evening. The person is not really there as a willing diner. He's there under duress. And what's so funny is they then make a list of, you know, the service was really unfriendly, or the food took a long time to come, or in one case, they didn't wipe down the chairs outside for us. Now, on any different situation, under different circumstances, everything about the restaurant could have been identical and the guy would have had a great time. But what's weird about it is we kind of confabulate or construct rational and plausible sounding reasons for why something's good or bad. But quite often it's something totally different. And so one of the funny things I think it's interesting to do is to, if you find something you really like or something that's really successful, ask lots and lots of times, what is it that's so good about this? And anybody stayed at a Moxie hotel? Yeah, are you a fan? You're a bit Okay, it's interesting. Now, what's interesting about that is, and I was talking to some people from Marriott the other day. If you know what to expect and you've chosen it, it's a fantastic hotel. In other words, the trade-off is made explicit. Okay, there's no room service, there's no laundry service, your room will be very small, but there's a 24-hour barista on the ground floor, and long after you've checked out, you can hang out on the ground floor with a laptop for the next 11 hours if you want to, and no one will give you a hard time, and the whole bar and thing downstairs is open 24 hours. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're staying for a week, don't stay in a Moxie, but if you're staying for 1 or 2 nights, and you know what the deal is in advance, you really, really like it. If you turn up expecting the Four Seasons, you're going to be seriously pissed off. So there's also this really fascinating thing. I mean, I think there are loads and loads of psychological tricks still to be discovered. I'll give you two. One of which is that business of if you manage people's expectations, generally they're pretty happy. If bad surprises, they really hate. The other one, which I've always wondered about, which nobody ever does, is that oddly, we actually like people if they ask us to do them a favor. It's technically called the Benjamin Franklin effect. You can Google it. But no, you obviously think, okay, there's reciprocation, which is if people do a favor for us, we're more likely to like them. That's true to a large extent. But there's also this weird psychological effect that if someone asks really nicely and says thank you, we're actually happier having done them a favor. So if you ever want to ring a guest and say, I wonder if you could move your booking from 7:30 to 8, okay, don't cancel it or move it till 11 o'clock at night. If you ask small favors of your guests, without forcing it on them, you say, but only if you're free, but it would really help us out if you could come at 8 rather than 7:30. You're thinking, I've imposed on them. There's a very high psychological likelihood, weirdly, that they actually like you more for having done you a favor. And the idea is, well, I've done a favor for these people, so I must like them. It's almost like reverse psychology. So I think there are a load of tricks where we automatically assume one thing, that asking someone to move their reservation by half an hour is a real bummer. But if you handle it really well, you've actually possibly gained a more loyal customer, weirdly, by asking someone to help you out. And so I think that, I think knowing some of these tricks, everything's kind of context dependent, but it's really, really fascinating because you can spend ages going, we can't possibly do that. And someone goes, well, if you change the psychological frame, actually you can.
Amazing, mate. We're going to open this up to the floor. If anyone's got any questions, whack your hand up. I think you'll take this one, mate.
By the way, interesting question for everybody. Is Uber Eats a delivery organization or is it a marketing organization? Because it's kind of both, isn't it, when you think about it? Is that fair? Philosophically, you're both, aren't you? You're actually a marketing agency for particularly independent restaurants, and you're a delivery service. So it's a really interesting question, which is, how do you define yourselves? Sorry, question. Sorry, let me...
Hi. So I'm Jenny. I'm overseeing marketing for Chipotle in Europe.
Well done.
Thank you. A lot of the things that you talked about resonate with me. I'm ex-Taco Bell in the UK. And then also I had the... well... And
listen to them.
I also had the privilege to hear Will Guidara speak at our conference a couple weeks ago in the States, which was incredible. And he talked about his book, Unreasonable Hospitality. And you kind of look around the room and we're a quick service restaurant. We are fast casual, but we are quick service.
Yeah.
And he posed a question of what are you doing in your restaurants that is bridging this gap with hospitality? And I just wonder what your advice would be for a quick service restaurant. And do you focus on what you do basic and really well, or do you have to implement that human touch that you're seeing grow nowadays in this restaurant industry?
I think sometimes there's a really, really nice little trick, which is just do one eccentric thing, deliberately, almost gratuitously eccentric, which doesn't have to be expensive, but it does have to be slightly gratuitous. In other words, your finance department will hate it, okay? And the example I always give of that is the DoubleTree cookie, that you check into a DoubleTree hotel and they've got an oven underneath the check-in desk and they keep warm, freshly baked cookies there and they give you a bag of them as a kind of emblem of hospitality. And to be honest, it's a bit eccentric and it's a bit hokey and a bit weird. But I last stayed in a DoubleTree 14 years ago, and the only two things I can remember are it was in Chicago and I got a bag of cookies. And 14 years later, if someone said to me, do you want to stay in the Hilton? Actually, the Hilton owns the DoubleTree, but do you want to stay in the Hilton or the DoubleTree? 14 years later, I go, I'll stay in the DoubleTree, all other things being equal, on the basis of that one cookie. And so slightly gratuitous, weird eccentricities, particularly if they contribute to some sort of ritual, I think are really, really interesting. I thought that KFC campaign, to talk about your sister restaurant, focusing on gravy, was really, really interesting. Because it's kind of, I don't want to get philosophical here. I vastly prefer KFC to McDonald's. Everybody else? God, these people are bloody foodie snobs, aren't they? There are these things called fast food restaurants, okay, where a large percentage of the population like to eat. No. But I always think that McDonald's is like fascist food in that you've got to eat it in the prescribed way, whereas KFC, you can pimp it. You know, you can dip fries in gravy, you can tip gravy over things, you can mess it up. Okay, it's much more sort of libertarian, okay, than McDonald's, which is kind of prescribed eating. This is what you have. And so, I thought that campaign that just made everybody focus on the gravy was just an ingenious idea. You take something that is a peculiarity of yours and you just double down on it. There's a brilliant example of this. Anybody been to Bucky's in Texas? Nobody? Okay, if in Texas and the American South, there's a gas station chain called Bucky's, and the entire chain is predicated on a behavioral insight, which is if we want to be more successful than other gas stations, we have to create something which will cause people to drive past 2 gas stations to go to ours. What would that be? And they did a bit of reverse benchmarking, effectively. They said their theory was it tended to be the female passenger in the car who was the kind of user-chooser, and the issue was toilet cleanliness. And if you've ever been to a Bucky's, it's like the Disneyland of gas stations. It's completely surreal. There are about 200 gas pumps. Anybody going to Texas in the near future, you've got to just basically take a trip to a Bucky's. It's completely bizarre and surreal. They sell huge quantities of deer corn outside. It's wildly kind of Texan and eccentric. But the one thing they double down on is the female loos are like palaces. And then there are posters on the highway which said, next Bucky's only 76 miles, you can hold on. And so they basically just took one thing that everybody else did badly, a bit like Will Guidara, the coffee and the beer, and they said, we're not only just going to do it quite well, we're going to do it so amazingly well that it becomes the main topic of conversation. And because it's the main topic of conversation, it then becomes the discriminator, if you think about it. And that's what advertising typically did. It took something that you did better than somebody else. It made such a lot of noise about that one thing that you came to think that that was the most important thing in your decision. Okay, and Bucky's has exactly done that with its toilets. And then the whole business plan proceeded from there. They said, we're going to have 24-hour toilet cleaning, so that means the gas stations are going to have to be a certain size in order to support 24-hour work. And then the whole thing just mushroomed from that one simple behavioral insight.
Rory, I know one of the things you talk about is that businesses often focus on metrics that are easy to measure rather than necessarily things that matter. What are some of your advices for securing buy-in to get businesses to focus on things that maybe matter but are hard to measure? Because we've all got finance departments. We all need to deliver ROI in PowerPoint presentations, etc. Like, how do we convince businesses to focus on things that matter but are hard to measure?
I think the first speaker pointed to one of the hardest things to measure, which is also one of the most important things, which is the culture. And it's very difficult to quantify. Anybody watching The Pit at the moment on HBO Max? Blimey. Do you only go to high-end restaurants? You never watch television or go to fast food outlets? Okay, don't worry. I'm just trying to get the measure of the target audience. But The Pit is set in an ER, in an A&E, as we call it in Britain, an emergency room. And what it's all about, really, is it's not about quantification. It's about the culture that you need to have if you're going to be an effective emergency room, which is, it's almost a bit like that Dutch concept of total football. People are always stepping in for other people. People will make suggestions. Sometimes people are harsh to other people, but it's overall long-term fair, for example. There isn't actually favoritism for the most part, and where there is, it causes huge problems and so on and so forth. But that's one of the most important things which I think, and David Ogilvy, who founded Ogilvy and Mather, his great cultural lesson came from working as a chef in the Hotel Majestic in Paris, under a fairly renowned French chef. And after he'd had that experience of working there, he realized that fundamentally there was something that you can't really measure or quantify, because it's not really, one of the mistakes we make, I think, is we judge people individually, whereas a high-performing team should be judged like a team, really. Because they'll police each other. If you apply very interesting experiment, actually. Greg Jackson at Octopus Energy and also Shopify, They have teams of 10 call center workers, and they only measure the productivity of the team. All they measure is how many people you look after and how happy they are. They don't measure time taken on the call or time taken to answer a call or anything of that kind. They just measure customer satisfaction multiplied by number of customers. And that's how the team gets rewarded. And they then have the freedom within those loose targets to work out how to do it best among themselves. And some people will have strengths and some people will have weaknesses. And people learn the division of labor bottom up. Whereas what we've always done now is we made the division of labor top down. And there's a spontaneous division of labor. In advertising, it's when you have a pitch. You have a new business pitch, and you get 15 people in a room, and they all realize that some people are good at this and some people are crap at that. And they basically all play to each other's strengths. And a team can do that. What we've instead done is we've defined everybody's role as if they're a complete individual. We've ignored how they interact with other people and how they complement other people. And we've judged them and we've rewarded them purely on the individual performance. Shackleton, on that extraordinary voyage to the Antarctic, basically hired one person for the voyage because he thought they were funny and they'd cheer everybody else up. Now, individually, what I'm saying is what we should do is optimize for group performance, not optimize for individual performance, because ultimately what really matters is how a group performs. When you're trying to measure the individuals within it, you actually miss a lot of what's important. Maybe one person is less billable than somebody else, but actually the reason they're less billable is because they do something really, really useful for everybody else in the team. And so, quantification bias is a massive problem. The great thing in a restaurant is generally people know that the unquantifiable is really, really important because, for example, how do you quantify a smile or a tone of voice or any of those things? And you have to be able to punish people or reward them for getting those things right or wrong. And there's never going to be a number. And nor should there be, really, because the things we care about generally, it's very similar to, my argument of quantification bias is we made the high-speed 2 train faster when we should have made the train journey more enjoyable. If you'd put hospitality people behind the high-speed 2 brief rather than engineers, you would have got a completely different train, right? If you give them the brief to Disney, they would have said, I don't really care how fast the train is. The question is, how do we make the journey between London and Manchester so enjoyable people feel stupid going by car? And that's a really interesting question. Instead, they give the brief to a load of engineers who turn it into speed, time, distance, price, because those are numbers. But it's the wrong question, really, isn't it? You could have produced a super cool train, okay, which would have really encouraged people to go to Manchester, rather than producing a train that helps people who are going to Manchester anyway go there a bit faster. And we know that because Disney does it, okay? We know that Disney does this because every year millions of people go to Orlando, which is basically in the middle of a fucking swamp, okay, right? They've made it sufficiently entertaining that Brits in August go to an incredibly hot and humid place willingly and pay to do so. So, you can change behavior by making something entertaining much more potently, I think, than you can by making it faster or more utilitarian or something of that kind.
I think we'd have to wrap that up.
But no, there's one more, wasn't there? We had one more question.
Oh, there we go.
There we are, yes, sorry.
I'll be quick, don't worry. My question is basically around brand and scaling without losing heart and soul. I'm a solo founder of a brand called Roll Boys, and it's very much founder-led storytelling, community building, alongside a great product.
What is the food, actually?
Cinnamon rolls.
Oh,
Just
wow.
one product. Yeah, different.
You're not Danish, are you?
No. It's American-style brioche-based, cream cheese-based frosting. Different flavors, yeah, and it was like I said, it was very much founder-led. Like it was a lot of storytelling, bringing people along for the journey, and it's created an amazing community. And I've got big visions and big dreams to scale the brand. So I guess my question to you is, how do you scale a brand without losing that founder feeling?
Probably don't sell to private equity. Is really good. No. And actually, I mean this quite seriously. So, in 2024, there were 5 winners of a gold award at the IPA Advertising Effectiveness Awards. And suddenly, we all noticed that 4 of them were family-owned businesses. So it was actually, if you want to know, Specsavers, McCain, Yorkshire Tea, and Laithwaites. 2 of them in the food category, I guess. 3, actually, in the food category. Founder-led, family-owned. Okay, Yorkshire Tea is owned by the same Betty's family, Betty's of Harrogate. And one of the questions we've started, the 5th one was Guinness, by the way, which is sort of run like a family-owned business. And I've started to believe that actually, if you look at really innovative companies that consumers like, okay, overwhelmingly, Dyson, JCB, all the most impressive companies are not PLCs where they're obsessed with the next quarterly report and EBITDA, which apparently stands for earnings before interest, tax, depression, and anxiety. And they're not obsessed with financial metrics. They're not spending all their time talking to investors. They're obsessed with their customers. And I went around Texas, Bucky's, family-owned, HEB. There's no one Texan here, are they? This is all meaningless to you. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I know there are no Texans here, because if there are Texans here and I mention Bucky's, they all go, whoa, like that. It's like a knee-jerk response. And I suddenly realized that basically, if you look at it, is Greg's family-owned? I've got a vague idea it is it? Well, it's certainly family-controlled, isn't it? Weird phenomenon. Of course, you don't know what Greg's is, do you? I've forgotten. I've forgotten I was in such rarefied company. It's a very popular bakery chain. But actually, what's interesting about Greg's, in fairness to Greg's, is nobody dislikes them, do they? You do? Okay, right. Okay, I found this strange group of people as a secret society who really, really hate Greg's. Okay, right. They've got a good app, actually. And anyway, so I think stay family-owned or stay founder-led. If you think about Octopus Energy, it's founder-led, Greg Jackson. AO, John Roberts, again, it's a PLC, but John Roberts still runs the whole show. And the great thing is, if you retain independent control, okay, you can test ideas without having to justify them first. The problem you have if you're in a financially controlled organization, you know, the 4 horsemen of the bureaucratic apocalypse are basically finance, procurement, compliance, and HR, right? They're basically people who are paid to say no, as far as I can see, okay? And they demand a ridiculous level of proof before you can try anything. Because they, oh, no, we need to know the business case. Because all they are is frightened. They're frightened of making a mistake. The great thing about owning your own business is you can actually make mistakes, and it's cool, because you're not going to fire yourself. And so most businesses that are run and dominated by financial thinking become incapable of either long-term marketing or innovation, because both of those things generally require short-term pain for longer-term gain. And they're only interested in the short term, so they're incapable of building a brand, and they're incapable of really doing exciting innovation. I'll give you an example of a large company, and these are the best marketers in the world, by the way, Procter & Gamble. I'm not going to diss them, they're fantastic. But someone I was speaking to from P&G said they had this new P&G product, and it was, actually, this may not work for you either if you don't go to Greg's and you've never heard of Taco Bell, but I'll do my best. Okay. It basically was, if you'd left your clothes on a chair the night before, you could spray your clothes, and it was a bit like ironing them. It smoothed them out and made them look a lot better. And the most senior person at P&G demanded she spend $500,000 on research because they refused to believe that people didn't prepare what they were going to wear the night before. Okay? They literally didn't believe it. Look, we don't all have a maid, right? And so the extent to which, if 90% of progress happens backwards, penicillin, Viagra, okay? Someone has a lucky observation and they ask what it means and they build on it. Darwin didn't have an idea, he looked at birds and then he worked it out backwards. And nearly all progress happens backwards. But in an organization where you've got to justify everything you do on a kind of cost-benefit analysis basis, you have to do the reasoning first. But when you look at, Red Bull, I always make the case of it, totally fucking wacko idea, isn't it, okay? Everybody hates the taste. They researched the taste. People said, I wouldn't drink this piss if you paid me to, right? You know, it costs a fortune, comes in a tiny can. And if you think about it, miso soup, all those things, okay? There are a hell of a lot of things which make no sense until you recontextualize them in some way. And the great thing with cinnamon rolls is if you only sell cinnamon rolls, people are going to imagine these are pretty seriously good cinnamon rolls. There's a bar in Deal called Bloody Mary's. When I go there, I always order a Bloody Mary, because if you call your bar Bloody Mary's, you're kind of obliged to produce a pretty good Bloody Mary. And so You know, there are all these wonderful things. The opposite of a good idea is another good idea. Quite a lot of businesses have been really, really successful basically doing the opposite of what their competition do, even if it seems silly. And the problem you've got in a big business, or if you've got private equity or someone behind you, is everything you do you have to justify in financial terms. And fundamentally what that means is you've only got two tools: market research, which is often unreliable, and economic theory, which is a terrible guide to how humans really behave. As I always say, look, I'll give you the perfect example of this. Farmers' markets are stupid, aren't they, right? Because objectively, okay, it's out of doors, so you might get rained on. You've got to pay 6 times to buy 9 separate things. And weirdly, you pay a premium for buying direct from the manufacturer. In no economic frame of reference does the farmers' market make any sense at all, okay? Meanwhile, Tesco Extra, okay, which sells loads of things under one roof and you can check yourself out and pay low prices, is totally rational. But what you see increasingly is people miss some social component of shopping and they feel that the whole experience has been dehumanized by technology, so they seek the opposite. And by the way, it changes over time. When I was a kid, the rich kids at school, you know, the ones who'd never heard of Taco Bell and so on, the rich kids at school, they'd all go, oh, I went to Schiphol Airport, it's incredible, I bought Walkman, it was amazing, and, you know, there's shops there and restaurants and everything. And then they go to Dubai Airport, and then they go to Changi Airport and see, oh, it's incredible, there's shops everywhere. And there you go. And then over time what happened is every sodding airport in the world became like a shopping centre. And suddenly people start going, have you been to London City Airport? It's brilliant. There are hardly any shops there, and you get to the plane in 5 minutes. So over time, what tends to happen is companies tend to benchmark against each other and they all copy the same thing. And that creates a market opportunity for the opposite. Now, there's a terrible phrase. I don't approve of it, okay? Don't cite me as the source. But it's a quote from the late Sir James Goldsmith, who said, when a man marries his mistress, he creates an immediate job vacancy, okay? Now, that is not good life advice, but it's quite good marketing advice, which is when everybody gets committed to one thing, you create a marketing opportunity to do the opposite thing. That's effectively what James Goldsmith was saying, albeit inappropriately. Sorry, okay, no, before I get cancelled. Yeah, exactly, okay, yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Absolute pleasure, Dan.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you're loving the episode. I'd appreciate a really small yet significant favor, por favor. Please may you click the subscribe button, get in the comments, tell me what you think about the episode, tell me what you think we did on the show. It may not seem much, but it really helps us grow and helps us get bigger guests. Thank you so much.